Hello everybody, and welcome to day 19 of 28 days to master level chess tactics. Today we're going to get into interference, and I'm going to give interference 2 days, and I'm going to go through the rest of the themes in about 2 days to finish out the rest of this course, because I want to cover, I think, 5 kind of side themes like deflection and decoy, if I haven't already covered those. All right, so let's get into this position. This is white to move, and it's basically an introduction to what interference is. Now, interference is actually a tactic that is pretty self-explanatory, and it basically actually describes what it does. So in terms of chess, we always talk about piece activity and a thought process. And how you find interference tactics is you look for ways to literally interfere with your own pieces and pawns with the activity of your opponent. All right, so this is white to move, and you can pause the video now. All right, let's get into this position. So with white to move, you can see that black has a pretty crazy attack. Materials equal, but in terms of activity, black has this light square bishop and this rook that are very active, and he's essentially threatening mate in 1, attacking the queen, and the queen is ready on h3 to checkmate on g2. So it looks like white has some problems here. Now, the saving grace in this position is black's weak back rank. Notice these 3 pawns are hemming in his king, and this rook on the c-file is ready to checkmate. But of course, you can't do that because the queen is protecting on c8. So these kind of long-range backwards tactics are sometimes hard to miss, but you need to make sure any forcing move you make is met by your opponent or not. So always look for those kind of backward moves. And you'd see that opponents, especially in blitz, even international masters, grandmasters, miss those kind of tactics because they are just geographically, or I guess geometrically, they're harder to see because you'll say, oh, I'll just checkmate here. And literally out of the corner of your eye, you can miss that the queen can take. All right, so taking that information, you know that if you move the queen, he's just going to mate you. And so you need to find something very surprising. Now, in this position, it actually took me a hot minute to find, but g4 is a sudden interference tactic that accomplishes 2 things. You have a sudden threat on the queen, and now you're actually cutting off the coordination of the queen to protect c8. So if he just takes your queen, whether the bishop or the queen, then you actually just get a checkmate. Notice that the queen can't come back because the pawn's blocking it, interfering with it, I guess I should say. You just take. And if he just tries to protect his back rank, even just something like here, well, then you just take the queen, and there's nothing he can do. All right, so actually when I looked at this, I thought initially something like queen to f5, but I noticed that the queen could just take, or even worse, he would just checkmate in the calculation. So these kind of sudden moves like g4, they're kind of crazy moves that you wouldn't really find from a normal thought process. So this is how kind of the deductive logic of chess can come into play at times in your thought process, where you notice a goal that you're trying to accomplish, namely trying to protect your king from this mate on g2 and to cut off the c8 protection so you can checkmate on the back rank with your rook. All right, so let's get into one more position as an interference example. In this position, it's white to move, and you can pause the video now. All right, so of course, materials equal in this position, a little unbalanced, but otherwise equal. And white does appear quite a bit more active in this position. Black has a slightly exposed king, and it looks like the rook's centralized, and this knight's ready to come in somewhere. Now, of course, the knight is pinned to the queen, and he can't necessarily move back because the queen could just take it. Now, using these factors, you should also notice the queen check here of the king, or the queen check here as well, but the queen check there also hits the rook. So basically, you can get interference by playing knight to d4. Now this works because if the knight takes, you just take the queen, you win the queen, and the rook's not protecting it, of course. There's no check. You should also look for that. You know, if the king was sitting on g3, he'd be able to check. Well, I guess not check there because the queen could take, but check on e2, and he'd get the queen back. And now if he takes with the pawn, well, let's go back here. If he takes with the pawn, I meant here, and then you check here, and you get a double attack on the rook and the king. Now the interesting thing too is that you also have a double attack here with queen to h5, threatening checkmate with the rook. Let's play it here. Now you're hitting the rook, and you're also threatening checkmate. So for example, if he just moved his rook, then you actually get a checkmate. Even the queen takes, it doesn't matter because you get checkmate. So you'd have to play something like g6, and you just take the rook. All right, notice as I said before, he can't move back because either you just take the knight or you can just check here anyway. I'd probably just take the knight. You don't want to take the queen because it's protected by the knight. All right, so let's look at a variation here. Rook takes d4. Now this is a slightly more difficult variation because he does have this passed pawn, and you need to check that you can stop it. So you'd have to look at rook to e2 to blockade the pawn. Now if he pushes, you just go rook to d2, and you're going to win this pawn back. Notice he can't go here because then you just take the queen. He has to take back with the knight, and then you win the pawn. And this should be a very easily winning endgame with a rook for a knight. All right, so from the beginning of this position, this is a very clear interference tactic as well, because literally white is using his knight to interfere with the coordination of the queen and the rook, and also create some threats against this knight. That's why knight to d4 works ultimately, is because the knight is pinned to the queen, and he's also threatening to just take on c6. So black must do something more drastic than just wait it out. All right, so this was day 19 and the first day of interference. Hopefully this clarified what interference is for you, and we get into some more complicated examples. I'm going to give you 2 tomorrow of interference, and I'll see you in the future. Don't fret if you got the solution wrong. There will be another time.